So hi Maria. Hi Maria, thank you for coming in and meeting with me again.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. So this is actually going to be our first session of CPT. We met briefly last week just to do a little bit, treatment planning and talking just briefly about your options for treatment for PTSD. And I wanted to say, thank you for coming back in, and we had talked about CPT being an option, and just wanted to see if you had any questions first about that first session, anything that had kind of weighed on your mind from that first time before you came in today.
No questions. I think I might have some later on, but right now, no question. It kind of makes sense.
Okay. And we're going to be talking a lot today about what CPT is and what to expect. So you're going to be getting, a lot of more information. So feel free at any point to ask questions, and we'll talk about afterwards. Okay.
Okay.
So the first thing, you had filled out your PCL when you had first come in the waiting room. So I just wanted to go over that briefly with you. So the PCL is a scale that's used to measure symptoms of PTSD. We're going to use it on a weekly basis, and we use it as a way to monitor change over time and how things may be going in treatment. And so right now your score was a 63, which tells us that you fall in that range of criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder at this time. And so we're going to use this to measure symptoms over time, and we'll talk a little bit about it too when we're going through how the therapy helps manage and helps reduce and recover from these things. Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you have any questions about the PCL that you filled out, or things that were confusing or didn't make sense?
No, it was confused. It wasn't confusing. I didn't realize some of these could be PTSD. It could be related to the symptoms, like the concentration and especially that one.
Mm-hmm.
Being kind of super alert, I guess. I kind of knew, but I didn't really think about it as much.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've been having some experiences that you didn't really realize how connected they might actually be to what you experienced. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And that's what we're going to spend the first part of this morning talking about. Are what are all these symptoms, and what are things that can happen after a trauma that might be showing up for you? Yeah. So that's a good insight that you have right there. So for today, our agenda for this morning is that we're going to talk about the symptoms of PTSD. We're going to talk about how PTSD can be viewed as a symptom of non-recovery versus, not so much that it's a problem within the person, but it's that this natural recovery process got stalled. And so we think about it that, with treatment, we can help facilitate that recovery process for you. And then the role in how avoidance maintains some of these symptoms that you're experiencing, and just, briefly, how does CPT work? And so for today, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking. Normally in sessions, I'm not going to really be talking this much, but I really just want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what you're doing, and, to help answer questions and to help explain, what might be driving some of those symptoms that have been really impacting things for you more recently, right? So this is the first thing I want to go over with you, is to talk a little bit about what those symptoms of post-traumatic stress are, and our ideas about why, some people get stuck in that recovery process. So I'm going to give you this worksheet. We're going to look over it together while I talk it through, okay? Mm-hmm. So after a trauma happens, symptoms, these different symptoms that you identify, they are pretty normal, right? Because trauma is a really, really scary situation, and so they can be normal reactions, such as having those intrusions. And so by intrusions, we mean thoughts, dreams, about the trauma, about the experience that happened, flashbacks when, things are triggered. So a flashback is that feeling like you're back in there again.
Oh yeah, I have those when I hear a storm coming.
Oh, okay. And how often does that happen for you?
Well, we haven't had a lot of storms right now because it's been winter, so it's more snowstorms. But there was that one snowstorm that there was lightning in it. So that one I had it then. Okay. But usually in the spring, it happens pretty frequently. It doesn't actually have to storm. It just, even when it starts raining, after a while, it starts getting really scary, and sometimes I feel like a tornado's coming.
Okay, yeah. So those flashbacks, they can be really scary, and it can often happen, like you said, when it's easy to identify a trigger, right? But sometimes those intrusions can happen when you don't even expect them to happen, right? So there can be something that reminds you of the tornado and of your experience that might lead you to having some really intrusive thoughts, but there might also be, or flashbacks, but might also be times where things, you find yourself a little bored, a little quiet, or you're not feeling so good, and now it's almost like you get distracted and those images and those intrusions come up for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so another thing that we want to talk about too is this arousal piece. So arousal are things like you talked about concentration. You didn't realize that could actually be connected to your experience with the tornado, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so our sleep can get really impacted. You might find yourself feeling more irritable or angry and more on guard, so more alert.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds, that you're nodding your head yes. How do those show up for you?
Well, I have like 5 different weather apps on my phone, and I feel like I'm always having to look at my phone, and it's I think sort of that's, I guess I thought that I just had lots of things going on, but I guess that makes sense if I'm always looking at my phone to check the weather. It's kind of hard to concentrate on other things, and just kind of any noise, I like pull out my phone to see if it's going to start storming. So yeah, I feel like and then I get really angry when people kind of bother me or tell me to put my phone away or kind of make jokes about the weather. Like it's not cool.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and I can see how that's all really connected, right? And that's when we think about this piece of it, right? If you look at this pie, it's that they all play off one another, right? So if you're having, a lot of those memories or thoughts or dreams, it can lead you to feeling, more on edge. You're not sleeping, you're having poor sleep, you're feeling more irritable. The way that you're thinking about and remembering your experience can lead, and they all kind of feed off one another, right? And so what happens when we think about, after a traumatic experience happens, is that over time, those things that all kind of feed each other, they stop to trigger one another, right? So what happens is that you can, over time, those emotions and those intrusions, they naturally decrease by allowing yourself to talk about it, to think about it, to be around things that might remind you of it, necessarily without that avoidance. And so what we're going to really think about is that avoidance piece of it, right? That maintains those negative feelings and those symptoms, essentially, right?
I feel like that happened to my neighbor, but my neighbor's over it because we went through the tornado together. So she got over. She was fine. She still lives in the Midwest, but I can't even imagine living there again. So
okay, yeah. And so for you, it feels like you're really stuck back in that time. But then you're seeing other people that have been through it, and I wonder if you're kind of curious, how are they doing? How are they still living there? It doesn't seem. Yeah.
Some of them even had their houses torn down and. They're still there. I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine how that's working for them. Yeah. And so what we're going to talk about is thinking about, what got stuck for you, right? What got stuck for you? And so we want to determine what got in the way, and we want to help you to get unstuck so you can aid that natural healing process, right? And so there's many different reasons why that process stalls. And one of the things is that we know that when we're in a trauma, our control center of our brain, it goes offline, right? And we start to act on autopilot. So our stress response kicks in, and that includes fight or flight, which is, most people think about, something happens, they go into fight or flight mode. But another reaction that can often get overlooked is freeze. Have you heard about the freeze response?
Yep, I'm pretty sure I had the freeze response.
Okay.
Because I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. And so when we think about, let's talk a little bit about the fight or flight first, right? So fight or flight is when our body is getting ready to fight or flee danger, right? But, so when that happens, we have all that physiological signs. The blood is, rushing to our legs. We're getting ready to run. You can feel that feeling like you got kicked in the gut or you're about to faint. You're not thinking about, what's important to you or your values or what you could have or should not do. But what then ends up happening if fight or flight isn't an option, because sometimes, right, people can find themselves in situations where they're not able to fight or flight, and this is all happening kind of automatically, is that then the body goes into freeze mode. And what happens in freeze mode is that it's trying to reduce that physical pain, that psychological pain, and it can make you feel shut down emotionally. And so you said you had that freeze response. Yeah. How did that play out for you?
Well, I knew that there was this tornado coming because it was on the news, but then I was just kind of watching it, and I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do. But then it just seemed like all of a sudden it was like above the house, and they were like, this alarm went off, and the TV was telling people to get in the basement, and I didn't have a basement, so I didn't at that point I was just kind of staring at the TV because I was wanting somebody to tell me what to do. And then it got really dark. It was the middle of the day, and it was really loud. And my cats were running around, and I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. So it sounds like there wasn't much time between the weather report and then all of a sudden it was directly over you.
It kind of felt like that, although I think we kind of knew for a couple of hours that there was something coming, but it just felt like it really fast.
Yeah. So it happened really fast, and then it sounds like kind of that freeze response took over for you. Yeah. And that can be, a lot of times, you can find yourself, depending on how it played out and like how you just described, you can really find yourself judging yourself for what you did or didn't do.
Oh, there's so many things that I should have done differently.
Okay. And so you judge yourself based on what you did or didn't do, but it's based on what you know now, looking back at it. Right? And so the other thing, depending on our response in the moment, right, we can get stuck in what we did or didn't do, like how you described that. And we can also stay stuck in this process with avoidance. So, when they're confronted with an intrusion or a reminder, if people allow themselves to feel emotions or to talk or think about the trauma, they're more likely to integrate that corrective information, right? Which helps facilitate the recovery process so that they're able to emotionally process and understand and make sense of what happened in the moment. So those things they did or didn't do, or the things that other people did or didn't do. But for other people, they might find themselves stuck, in the symptoms, which can lead to this diagnosis of PTSD. So stuck in that avoidance because the distress is so uncomfortable when they're confronted with those reminders and the negative emotions. So what happens is that, those emotions, that distress, it's so overwhelming that it can feel like the only way to get some relief from it is to avoid, right? It makes sense. You're feeling really anxious about going out, and so you decide, I'm not going to go, I'm going to stay home, I'm going to go in the basement so I can't see the weather, I can't hear the rain hitting the house. And what happens when you do that, like to your anxiety?
Oh, if it's raining outside, I feel so much better being in my basement because then I know that I'm going to be safe in my basement.
Okay, yeah. So if it's raining, then it's almost like you've created that habit of rain means the only way I'll feel better is to go into my basement.
Yeah.
Right? And it works.
It works, yeah. I feel better.
I think about behavior, and all of the behavior and the things that we do it for a reason, right? It benefits us in some way. But on the flip side of that is that there's a lot of cost to that. Right? We know that the avoidance really can work in that short term. It makes you feel better. It makes that distress initially go away. But over time, it's really what maintains all of these symptoms because you never give yourself the chance to learn that you could be okay being in the rain, that you can be okay staying upstairs, or other ways. And as we get to know each other more, we'll talk more about how that avoidance plays out for you, because that's really going to be one of the number one things we're going to be working on. But, that avoidance in the long term, it's really what stops you from getting better. So what we're going to be talking about avoidance, we're going to be examining it, we're going to be labeling it. When it happens, I expect it to come up, and so we're just going to address it for what it is. Okay. Without any judgments on that, in that regard. Okay. So any questions or thoughts so far just on that piece that we went over? So a little bit about what keeps people stuck from recovery.
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, I do some of that avoidance, and then I kind of just don't even go out in the rain or anything like that, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And so we see right on here is that when those things when there's the avoidance, right, that the avoidance of the memory, that it leads to all these avoidance of the external reminders, because if you're not wanting to think or feel about the trauma, then you're going to avoid all of those things, externally that might remind you of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why not, I'm going to have you hang on to this, okay? We're going to use, you're going to hang on to this, and we'll we'll talk about homework later and all of that to have you look over that.
Okay.
And so another, on our agenda, what I really want to help you, what I want to talk about is also about this idea, it's called cognitive processing therapy. So we want to talk a little bit about what is this whole cognitive piece, like what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Have you heard that word before?
Yeah, and CPT, like I did a CPT group once.
Okay. How was the group for you?
It was good. It was a lot of talking about thoughts and then what we did. So
yeah.
I know that cognitive means thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. And so when we think about cognitive theory, so the theory that drives those different cognitive behavioral therapies, right? So CPT is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And so if we just think about being humans, we have a really strong desire to predict and to control our lives. Often believing that we have more control than we really do. Mm-hmm. And so we start to organize information to help us make sense of things, right? So we know what to generally expect when, how to differentiate between what's dangerous and safe, what our values are around what's right or wrong, and just to make so things that we do in our day-to-day life become easy, right? Like, so we think about going out to eat at a restaurant, right? We didn't always know how to eat at a restaurant, but over time you've learned what to expect, right? You know that when you go into the restaurant, you're going to see a hostess, she's going to seat you, you're going to get a menu, you're going to order, you're going to get a check and pay at the end, right? Mm-hmm. So those are all ways that, we've kind of compartmentalized and made little folders for different experiences in our life. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that when we're born, our view of everything is very kind of rudimentary, right? We're just beginning to learn. And so if we think about, like, take a chair, for instance. If we're a little kid and someone points to that object right over there and says, that's a chair, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, okay, there's 4 legs and I can sit on it, right? So now everything with 4 legs and a flat surface that you could presumably sit on becomes a chair, right? But then over time you start to learn that there's different categories of chairs, right? So you learn that there's a office chair, a dining room chair, a recliner, a living room chair. You tell the difference between, you might have thought a sofa was a chair, or even, a low table, you might have called it a chair because it has a flat surface and 4 legs. And so what happens is that as we grow older, we really start to develop some more fine-tuned categories, and it really helps us have that greater sense of control and understanding. Right? And one of the things that we might pick up along the way from our parents, people in our community, teachers, if you belong, do you follow a specific religion or faith or?
Not really right now, culture? But I grew up in a church, yeah.
Okay, so you might have heard this in your childhood in church, is that, we naturally want to, as humans, we are natural meaning makers. We try to find meaning in things. And so there's this idea that we refer to as the just world belief. And what that idea says is that it's along the lines of, if you've ever heard good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, right? Because think about when you're a kid and your parents try to discipline you, your parent's not going to say, if you throw that cup at your brother, you may or may not get in trouble, right? Because that's not going to teach you that throwing the cup is a behavior that's not an appropriate behavior. And so it's really normal that, we do something and it's either, the message that's given to us is either that was wrong or that was okay, and then we might kind of associate that belief that, bad thing, if I do something bad, bad's going to happen to me, right? But if I do good, then good things should or normally will happen to me, right? Yeah. And so often, now as an adult, when things go wrong or go bad, and we can't come up with the why, right, we revert back to that belief because that early learning in us, it's not erased, and it's what we often use to try to make sense of things that are actually senseless situations. Right? Yeah. Have you found yourself kind of saying that to yourself, why me?
Yeah.
It must be something about me that this happened.
Yeah, it just seems like, I think it's worse because I knew that there were things that I should have done differently to prepare for it, which I didn't do. So I think that's also part of why, it kind of that of course it happened because I had like, you know, months, years maybe of like doing the things I was supposed to do to prepare that people told me when I lived there, and I didn't do that. So it kind of seemed like, well, of course it happened, sort of kind of like teaching me a lesson, like nature teaching me a lesson that I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
So you have that belief that because you didn't do that, then this must be why it happened.
I mean, like if I had the weather radio, like I would, you know, I would have gotten an alarm sooner. If I, you know, got the mattress in the bathroom, that would have been safer. It just all those things that I knew I was supposed to do, but I like didn't do them. Yeah.
Okay. And so, do you find yourself kind of stuck on that thinking and trying to come up with the answers for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I probably wouldn't feel this way if I had done those. You know, like I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't have these symptoms now. I wouldn't have nightmares if I like did that, because then it wouldn't have like impacted me so much.
Okay. Yeah, and those are all really good. You know, and those are exactly the type of beliefs that we're going to really be examining and checking out and seeing how, you know, how they do relate to continuing and manifesting in these symptoms for you. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's actually a really nice bridge to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, is that when something happens that doesn't fit with our pre-existing beliefs, there can be different ways that we try to make it fit in, right? So one way is to make your interpretations of the event or the way you remember it, right? So how you had said just then, like if I had gotten the radio or if I had gotten the mattress, then, right? So what happens is that we try to make our interpretations or the way we remember it to fit with our pre-existing beliefs, right? So that could show up as blaming yourself for not preventing it. Yeah. Because, you know, thinking about changing the event is a lot easier than changing our deep-rooted belief system. And that also helps to maintain control, our sense of control over future events, right? And that can be kind of tricky because, you know, the event, we can't change the event and what happened, right? But sometimes it's the meaning and the memory of it and the understanding of its impact that we want to check out and see, you know, is there another lens in which we can look at what happened, right? And so when we think about, that's going to be one of our goals, right, is to think about, you know, how are you viewing the event? How have you made sense of it in the time that's passed since it? And is there another way to see it?
That would be nice.
Yeah, I think so too. And so another way that, you know, that these symptoms and these reactions can get maintained is when we change our beliefs so much, right? It's like we throw them out the window, right? So often this can look like I can't trust anybody, nowhere's safe, right?
Yeah, I have those.
Yeah. I can never protect myself.
Yep, I have that.
Yeah. And so often if this is saying like, you know what, I had these belief systems before, this thing happened, I obviously can't trust myself or those beliefs anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of them and I'm going to have to adapt a whole new set of beliefs in order to keep myself safe and in order to have that sense of control over things that are going on. Yeah. And oftentimes we can see that if there have been other negative experiences early on in life, that this experience might have served to reinforce those beliefs, right? So if you've had beliefs before around kind of trust or mistrust on yourself or others or safety, you know, or other things that this experience can just serve to reinforce that. Like, see, I knew I shouldn't trust myself.
Yeah, I kind of think of myself as pretty unlucky, especially with like weather things. Like I'm the person who doesn't have their snow shovel when there's a snowstorm, or I don't know where it is, or those kinds of things. So it sort of this kind of makes sense that it would have happened because I didn't have my like, weather radio.
So it could feel like this belief about myself must be true because...
I mean, I think it is true.
Okay.
I mean, I'm kind of pretty unlucky when it comes to weather.
So what we want to do with that, right, is to... We can't change that event, right? And I wish that we could, right? I wish that we could. But what we can do is to really understand and see about changing some of those beliefs and the meaning that you've made of it and the impact of it, right? To accept in a way what happened, right? So this way that you can facilitate that natural recovery process, right? I think about a water wheel, right? So if you have this water wheel, this big wooden water wheel, and it's just churning along, right? And then you get this big old stick and you just kind of stick it in there, right? The water gets all built up, it overflows. We want to just find a way to get that stick out, right?
I like that.
Yeah, we want to help facilitate. We want to keep that water wheel going because that's, we know that recovery is possible, and that what's happened after this tornado is that you've just gotten stuck in it. And so if we can help you get unstuck, get that stick out of the wheel, and help facilitate that recovery process through examining and thinking about the beliefs and the impact and the meaning that you've made of it, we can help do that. Okay. So I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing so far.
I'm doing okay. A lot of good information. I knew some of it, but some of it was new, so it was good.
Okay. So one of the things that we're going to do is we want to introduce this idea of a stuck point.
Okay.
So we're gonna take a look at this other worksheet in a minute, but I wanted to talk a little bit about stuck points because stuck points are thoughts. So we're talking a lot about beliefs. Remember, like that cognitive piece of it. Talking a lot about beliefs that can prevent recovery. Right? So these are beliefs that are often formed during or shortly after a trauma. They could have been reinforced, like we had said earlier, from earlier negative experiences. And what we're going to want to do is recognize and modify what you're saying to yourself, which might have become automatic. Have you ever told yourself something so often that it almost just feels like it must be true?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like that I'm unlucky, but I think it is true. I mean, I don't know, but but that's kind of something that I've kind of always said.
Okay. So now, it's like, well, that must be fact, right? Because you see it through that lens, and you have all this evidence. I hear you saying that supports that, whether it's the snow, the tornado, kind of other events that you've been in. Yeah. So it can feel, right, when we tell ourselves something long enough, it becomes a habit. And when that happens, we start to automatically accept it as true. Right? So when you were, let's do an example. And what were you thinking about before beginning this today, like before coming in today?
Oh, what was I thinking about? I was thinking about, some hope. So maybe that in the future I can go visit my friends that live in the Midwest, because I haven't been there since I left, because I just kind of expect like another tornado to happen kind of every time I even think about going there. And so that was sort of some hope. But then the other piece was that I felt like, I don't know, just that it would be hard to kind of talk about what happened, and because it just was so scary that it feels like I might like not be able to kind of handle talking about it.
So if you talk about it, it'll just become too much. You won't be able to control it.
Yeah.
Okay. And have there been other things in your life that you've had to talk about or share with somebody else that was hard, or a time that you felt a lot of that emotion?
My grandparents died, so that was a tough time, and I saw somebody after that for therapy, and that was hard to talk about. So I think that there are definitely times in the past, but I think this is different because it just feels like,
So there's so like this one is, it's kind of that really heavy hitter.
Yeah.
And so that's a really good point, is that when, coming in, it is really normal to have some of those thoughts, like, am I going to be able to talk about this without, am I going to lose control? Am I going to have difficulty handling it? But we're going to kind of go one step at a time. And we want to recognize those thoughts because we really want to kind of be able to take them out, be able to examine them. And one of the ways that we do that is we're going to be figuring out what are those stuff points. So what are those thoughts that are holding you back? They're often phrased in all or nothing terms, right? So all or nothing, you could use those words like always.
I think sometimes it feels like things are always going to happen. Like when it rains, it feels like there's going to be a tornado.
Yeah.
I know that there's going to be a tornado, but it feels like it. So then I just to be safe, like better be safe than sorry sort of thing. So then I just don't leave the house because that's where I'm going to be safe.
And so what are some of those things that you miss out on?
I mean, last weekend my friends were, because it was like raining so much, my friends were all kind of watching a marathon at their house, but I wasn't going to go. Then they asked if they wanted to come to my house, but I didn't want to have them over because I wasn't going to be in the living room. I was going to be in my basement. So then I just didn't watch anything. I didn't watch the marathon with them.
Okay. And it sounds like your friendships are really important to you. Yeah. And is that something that would be important to you, to be able to go out and do those things with your friends, like even if there's rain or?
Oh, I can't even imagine that, but that would be nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're going to want to start thinking about, what are those things? So you said like the all or nothing comes up for you. Like as soon as there's like something, it's like always like that feeling that it's always going to be dangerous. And so that way you're not going to even put yourself in the chance for that to happen. They can often be phrased as if-then statements, right? So, if I talk about this, then I won't be able to control my emotions, right?
Yeah.
If I had bought that radio, then this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I have that thought, yeah. If I prepared or if I listened to people.
Yeah, and they're not always I statements, so this is something too, because a lot of times people can think that it has to begin with that I, but it can often be ways that we think about the world, other people, ourselves, situations. They're very concise and often very black or white, right? So when we think about our stuck points, they're often extreme, right? So like we had said before, like I can't trust myself. Things are not safe. I can't protect myself. Bad things will always happen to me.
I believe that one, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to want to kind of start teasing that out. And the way we do that is that we're going to start creating what's called the stuck point log. We're going to want to write down all those thoughts. You've shared some really good ones with me today, ones that I can see having a really big impact in fueling and driving these symptoms and keeping you from doing the things that you really want to do. So we're going to start to keep track of those, okay?
Okay.
And another part of what we really want to target in CPT are our emotions, right? So that's the cognitive pieces when we're talking about like our thoughts, but another big piece of this is our emotions. And so I often think about there's I categorize it into two categories of emotions that follow after a trauma. There's the type of emotions, or there's the type of emotions in general, right? So there's the emotions that we would expect to flow naturally after a specific event, right? So think about if you just, celebrated a really big accomplishment that you were proud of. What emotion would you expect to feel after that?
I feel excited, I feel proud, happy.
Yeah, okay. And if someone close to you, passed away, right? What emotion might you feel?
I would feel sad.
Yeah. And if someone, cut you off and swerved in front of you and you had to slam on your brakes, what emotion would you expect to feel after that?
Angry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those are natural emotions. We expect to feel those things, right? So joy from positive events, sadness with loss, fear when we're in real danger, right? A car, a near miss for a car accident is really scary. And so those emotions all have a natural course. They don't continue forever unless they're being fed. And what we know is that after trauma, many people don't allow themselves to feel those emotions, right? They stuff them in, and so they never get the chance to run their natural course, right? If you think about that water wheel, they never have the chance to go, up and around and make their full rotation around the wheel. And like you said too, before you had mentioned, like if I talk about this, like I'm not gonna be able to handle it. So if you think about a soda bottle, right? If you have a soda bottle that's been shaken up, and you start to take off the lid, what's going to happen?
It's going to explode.
And so what if you start to notice that it's coming out, what is the inclination to do?
Closed, yeah.
Yeah, you want to twist it closed, wheel shut again, because you don't want it to all come out. So again, right, short term, it keeps you from getting soda spilled all over you, right? But what happens if you were to actually twist open the cap and leave it off?
It'll kind of bubble over and then settle down.
Yeah. So, we think about that with emotions as well, with these natural emotions, is that if we allow ourselves to feel them, to talk about them, to experience them, is that they're not going to stay, that soda bottle of emotion is not going to stay exploding forever, right? You're going to feel them, and then over time it settles, right? There's also kind of this idea, I like this idea of walking into the waves, right? When you're in the ocean and the waves are, more rough in the beginning, and you can feel kind of like you're being tossed around a little bit, but then there comes that point where the sand just gets really smooth and the waves and the water settles, right? And so the idea is that we want to, part of facilitating the natural recovery process is to feel these emotions in a really safe way, and getting some new experiences while you're feeling those emotions. And the other type of emotion, so there's natural, and the other type are manufactured emotions. And when we think about the word manufactured, what comes to mind for you?
That they're made?
Yeah.
Made up?
Yeah. So they're real emotions that you're feeling, but they're based on exactly like what you're telling yourself, right? You're feeling those emotions. You're making those emotions. So they're based on how you interpret the event, right? So those thoughts like, I should have done more, it was my fault, I must be a failure, I can't get over it, right? Those types of beliefs can lead to feeling shame and anger towards yourself. Yeah.
I do that.
And what we know about thoughts that are similar to those is that they're not necessarily based on facts of the trauma, but they're based on our interpretation, your interpretation of yourself and what happened, right? So it's kind of going back to that just world, right? We're always trying to find meaning, we're always trying to make sense of things and answer why. And when we do that, sometimes the answers that we create are the answers that fuel that negative emotion, feeling shame, self-hatred and loathing, guilt, blame. And so we know, right, if your belief system is producing these feelings and thoughts, right, then you also have the power to change them, right? If your mind has the power to create them, your mind also has the power to change them. And another way to think about it is with the fire, right? So you have a fire, and you just sit there, and what happens over time? You're just sitting by the fire, you're watching the fire. There's a couple pieces of wood in it, and what's eventually going to happen to that fire?
It's going to burn out when the wood's gone.
Yeah. What if you break out the gasoline, you grab the extra firewood that's been sitting in the front, and you just keep adding to it?
Then it's going to continue to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do is to be able to kind of sit back and stop adding to that fire, right? And so that's another, when we think about those beliefs and those stuck points, that's why it's so important to figure out, for us to kind of go in there like an investigator and figure out what they are, because we know that you do have the power to change them, or to polish them off a little bit. Right? And so you had shared briefly. Actually, before we go into that, I just want to see if you had any thoughts or reactions so far about that conversation about stuck points or emotions.
No, I think it makes sense. I know that I tried to kind of change a little bit of some of my thinking before, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, it's really hard to do, and it's especially really hard when you're kind of going it alone. Sometimes it can be really helpful to have someone that's kind of outside of the jar helping you see it, right? Because if you're in the jar, right, it's almost like you're looking up, but you can't really see outside, and so being able to have someone to help guide you, I think, can be really helpful. And that's why when we think about CPT, it's really about giving you the tools, right? I'm going to help facilitate them and teach them to you, but when we get towards the end, it's really going to be about you having the tools to be able to do it yourself. So that way, if in the future these things pop up again, you'll be ready and know what to do with them, right? And so if, just taking a few minutes, right, because right now and there will be time to talk more in depth about this, but to just take a few minutes right now, if you can almost give me kind of like the headline. You talked a little bit about what happened, about watching the weather, not having the basement to go down to, but if you can just, a few minutes, let me know a little bit about what happened that day.
So there was a tornado cloud situation that had been like traveling through the state. So we knew that it had like kind of touched down like, I don't know, like 2 hours away or something like that. And so it was like coming towards like where I lived in Missouri, and like I knew it was coming, and then it was on the news, but I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have my weather radio that, you know, I'd lived there for like 4 years and I still didn't have a weather radio. I didn't have a basement. I didn't actually really know what I was supposed to do in a tornado, even though it like it was on the news a lot, like in other places, not like in the town that I lived. And then like I felt like all of a sudden it just happened, and then it got dark and my cats were running around and I'm trying to catch my cats, and then I don't know what to do, and I'm like just freezing there, and then there's like hail. I don't even know what it was. It was like really loud outside and pitch black in the middle of the day, and it was so scary. And then
And about how long were you in the house for until it passed?
Oh, I can't even. I mean, at one point I heard, because at some point I got in the bathroom. I'm not even sure like when that happened, because I don't even remember that. But at one point I had heard, because I had my phone with me, so I finally found the news, and like on the news it said that like that the tornado warning was over.
Okay.
Or something, and it was like some other like thunderstorm warning or something like that. And then I could see like light outside. So I don't know. It wasn't long. I would say it was probably like 15 minutes. But then it, like that I was in the like that the alarm was on. But then it was longer, you know, while it was raining and just all the other stuff.
Okay. And then what happened? You know, just thinking about like immediately after that.
Oh, what happened? Like I like didn't want to leave the bathroom because I felt like it could come back. So I was there for a while. My cats are meowing and making noise, wanting to get out. And then there was like some damage, but not like big damage to my house. My house was still standing, but there was like some stuff that got moved around outside. And then there were other places that were damaged, like around town, where it kind of stuck down. And it sort of all those things that like you were supposed to do, like just kind of came to me, and I was like, I can't believe that I've been here for like years and do all these things.
So that's like when those kind of beliefs and everything it sounds like they came up and just kind of hit you right in the face.
It was just like, I mean, because they were on the radio, they were just saying like, if you're seeing this, you should be in your basement. And I was like, or, you know, stuff like that. Like, or if you have like, your weather radio should be, it's probably going off right now. Like, just, I'm like, I have a weather radio, like what? Yeah, so that, kind of reminded me of all those things. Yeah. And then like people, I had like a lot of missed calls and like,
So you had a lot of missed calls from people that were probably worried about you.
Yeah, and then I like couldn't reach kind of my neighbor who had been like sort of texting me earlier, but she was in her basement, so that's why she couldn't reach me. So then I felt like, it was just,
Okay. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that sounds, you know, we had talked about that being, you know, when we start therapy, we really do focus around what we call this index event, right? So this really significant trauma that you've experienced. And we'll talk a little bit with CPT. We do have 2 options, depending on if you want to kind of tell the story of what happened. We know that CPT works just as good either way, you know, so sometimes there can be reasons why people do want to share kind of in more detail the account of what happened, or sometimes, you know, they don't, and that's totally okay because the therapy works just as good. Have you thought about what might be?
I don't know. I think, I think that some of the thoughts that I have are about what happened, so I think I kind of will talk about it anyway, so I guess it wouldn't matter if I wrote about it. I don't know.
The account can be actually really, really helpful in helping to experience some of those emotions. You know, we talked about that it's really normal, you know, after trauma, in the effort to avoid feeling bad, we kind of shove and numb them all out and shove them down. And the account can be a really nice way to access some of those emotions that we need to access to help you move forward in recovery. And it can also help to tease out those stuck points, those beliefs and those thoughts in a way that can be really healing for you. And so we'll absolutely talk about that being something that we could add in as part of the treatment.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we're doing the kind of processing therapy, it's going to be really, really important about practicing, the work that we're doing in between sessions. So we're only in therapy for about an hour a week. And if you think about the course of the week, I think there's like 168-ish hours. Excuse if my math's not right on. But so that's only 1 hour out of, so many. And so it's going to be so important that you are practicing the practice sessions in between sessions every week to really help grasp kind of what we're doing and to help that processing continue beyond the hour that we spend together. I see so much, the really big stuff really kind of help people between sessions, right? That's where you're letting yourself think about things and process things and feel things in a way that can be really, really helpful for you. And so when avoidance comes up, we're going to talk about it, right? Like what's getting in the way of getting the assignments done? Could it be avoidance? Avoidance can be really, really sneaky and really tricky. It's not always so clear cut. So we're going to want to kind of notice that as it comes up. Are there any barriers right now that you could think of that might impact getting to treatment or getting the work done? Anything that would be important for me to know or talk about?
If it's storming outside,
okay,
that might make it hard for me to leave my. Well, I'm pretty sure that's going to make it hard for me to leave my house.
Okay.
To come to the appointment.
Okay. So if that were to happen, maybe that's one of the things that we could talk about is coming up with a plan. Okay.
I mean, eventually it would be nice if I could leave my house.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's gonna. I mean, that can be something that we kind of address right from the beginning, right? Is that feeling about safety being leaving the house, right? Have there been times before the tornado happened where you've driven or left the house in rain or bad weather?
Yeah, I mean, I did that all the time because I would drive and it would be rains and because I never really tornadoes seemed this terrible thing that happened in other places, but and I think that's part of why I didn't take it so seriously. But I was living in a place where tornadoes happen, so I should have done all these things. But before, I would just be outside. I would be driving. I would,
Okay, so before you felt pretty fine and safe, and you were able to drive in the rain pretty safely.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're in Connecticut now, and have there been?
There was a tornado. If you go to the New Haven Museum, there is an exhibit about a tornado that was here in
Okay. When was that?
I don't know, 18 something or early 1900s. There was a tornado, and all of some, I don't know. There's a drawing of it.
Yeah. So we know you're right. We know that extreme weather can happen anywhere, right? Just because we're in Connecticut doesn't mean that we're necessarily exempt from everything. But it also sounds like that it's been. How many years is that? Probably.
I don't know, probably 100 years.
100 or
but
something.
It could
years.
happen.
Okay. Yeah, and that's one of the. Yeah, and so that's the theme we're going to explore, right? Just because something's possible doesn't mean that it's likely, right? And we're going to explore that. So that's a really good point that you make.
But if you're an unlucky person, you just attract them.
Okay. So so it sounds like that's a really. We're going to put that right now, December, and that's definitely what we're going to kind of come back to help explore a little bit more, because I can see how that's really been impacting the ability to get out, to do stuff, and it might come in the way of, getting to therapy when you might need it the most, right? So the first part of the work that we're going to be doing, we're going to be really focusing on that trauma and what you say to yourself. So those messages you say to yourself, right? I can't go out, if I had done that, then this wouldn't have happened. And we're going to be really focusing on those things in the first half. You're going to be learning skills to help you tell the difference between fact and thought, right? So, and you also learn to ask yourself questions, right? To help challenge that. So kind of putting that investigator hat on. And we are going to use worksheets to help you be able to do this, right? So there is, a good amount of writing that goes along with CPT, whether it's in session, outside of session, to really help you begin to tease out, what are those stuck points? What are those beliefs? How do those impact what I'm feeling, right? And, is there another way to look at the situation? And if I were to look at it that way, would it change how I feel and in turn change, what you're doing? Right? And so we're going to, anticipate that avoidance, like I had said. So I hope that, if anything's happening, that you give me a call and we talk about it and we come up with a plan, okay? And it's so, it really is important that we keep that attendance and keep those assignments, because I know that this therapy can work and it can help people really have, a new experience with the things that they've been through, feel in a different way, be able to get out there and do things that are meaningful and important to them, right? But it's like with anything, you think about college, it's what you put in, you get out what you put in, right? You can go into something and really pay attention and take the notes and learn, or you can kind of put your headphones in while the professor's lecturing. You showed up, you were there, but you might not have taken much away from it, right? And so it's going to be really important. I'm going to be supporting and encouraging you in doing that work. So we're going to kind of take this log. So we're going to start, I already have a few ideas that I put down on this stuck point log. And so what I'm going to ask you to do between this week and next is to really think about, is to read through these. If you have any questions on, what are stuck points, how do all of these things, how did I get stuck in this versus so what's recovery, what's being stuck, how does it all play out? And we're going to take those stuck points and we're going to have this log, and it's going to be something that we're just going to keep building on week to week. So it's going to be this working document. And in the second half of treatment, right, we're still going to be using this log, but we're going to be addressing those themes that are impacted by trauma. So we often see that people's safety, trust, power and control, esteem, the way we think about ourselves and also others, right, and intimacy, which is really, how are we able to feel close to other people, and really importantly, how do we soothe and feel close to ourselves, right? And so we're going to be looking at, what are our stuck points, what are our beliefs, how have these themes in our life been impacted by this trauma? Right? And one of the ways that we start to do that right from the beginning is to have you work on something called an impact statement. So an impact statement is about a one-page handwritten essay in sorts to get you to start thinking about how you think about and explain the event that happened, right? How it impacted your views of yourself and other people and the world, why you might think that this event happened to you particularly, right? And how it's either changed or strengthened your views about others and yourself and the world. I'm not asking you to write specifics about the trauma. Like I said, if we add that component in, we'll be doing that later in around session 3-4 about the having you do that account. So this is really about the meaning and the impact that this experience has had on you, right? So life since this experience. I'm going to ask you to start it as soon as possible, because we know if the longer we wait to start something, the scarier it becomes. And so that way you have time to really write it thoughtfully. Right? So, any thoughts about that assignment?
No, I think I can do, because that's pretty clear. I feel like I think a lot about sort of where my life is now compared to back then before the tornado.
Yeah. So right in the getting in there about the way that it's been impacted, the meaning that you've made, and the reasons why you believe that it occurred, and that's really, we're going to use that a lot to get at some of these stuck points. Okay. So when we think about CPT, right, so we're going to have the first few sessions, we're going to talk about the impact, we're going to be learning some new skills, and eventually it's almost like I'm going to be handing the baton to you. So basically, teaching you to become your own therapist in that way, so you have these skills to carry with you throughout, way beyond our time that we're working together. I just want to check in and see kind of your reactions to what we talked about today, what we went over, anything that's coming up for you now.
Like I said earlier, feel hopeful.
Okay.
But it also feels kind of scary to kind of some of those thoughts about myself, or kind of things around safety. You mentioned safety.
Yeah.
Just seems like those would be really hard to change. I feel like I'm kind of an unlucky person. How do you change luck? And then safety stuff.
Okay. So I hear, that's really insightful, and really being able to see what those things are that are really impacting and hold you back the most. Yeah. Okay. So what we'll do is set up our next session for next week, and we'll have you read through the handouts that I had given you. Here's the sheet that will explain in detail about the impact statement. And feel free if you have any questions, you can let me know.
Okay.
But thank you so much for coming in today. And we'll talk next week.
Okay.